I would try to look into the mirror and shave without looking myself in the eye. I had become my dad, and it was just too much to bear, because I was doing to my wife what my dad did to me, and that is pull away, pull away. It was a hard time for me. But I started in a small little Pentecostal church. My dad was a preacher, but he is also an alcoholic. And it started when I was 11, that when there is addiction in the home, you can't talk outside the family. And Mom beat the crap out of me for telling anybody what went on in the house. The constant message was, you're not worth anything, and you'll never make it. In fact, when I left home at 17, that was the last thing my dad told me. He didn't want me to leave. He said, you'll never make it. So I left home, and I put a little band together. And the Imperials heard me, and they said, you want to come to Nashville and try out? So I did, and they hired me. I was 22. But I tried to act like none of the stuff in my childhood happened. I just tried to act, it's just done, gone, over here. But yet, when 17 years of your life, you have heard 1,000 times, you're not worth anything, you're not worth the salt that goes on your bread. I tell you, after a while, you begin to believe it. But I was in New York. I was 26 with Tori, my wife, and we were staying at her brother's house. And there were 3 Heinekens. And I thought, well, everybody else, has... So I'll just have this and cool down in my head, And so I drank the first one. And I started feeling something. And so I drank another one. And I felt even better. Those voices started getting quiet. And so I had the third. But if anybody knows anything about alcohol, within 4 hours it's all gone. And then you start feeling very, very guilty that you're a gospel singer, but you're trying to numb your feelings. And then it started a cycle. For probably about 8 or 9 years of just living in secret. And my wife not even knowing what was going on. It was in the mid-'80s that my world collapsed. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I wound up in Memphis at the Civic Center there. My band and I were playing, sold out house. And I was in the dressing room on the floor crying so hard that mucus and everything else was just rolling out of and I couldn't stop. And I was begging God, heal me or kill me. I can't live this way anymore. I cannot live this way. I surrendered. I just surrendered and said, God, whatever it takes, I will do it. I will do it. I had spent the night with a friend of mine from the church, and I told my friend that my parents had an argument. And when I got home, my mother was waiting for me. Just because you don't talk outside the family. She came over with her fists and just started punching me in the face. Anywhere, and I was just blocking it, her just punching me like a boxing match. And I remember just kind of curling up in a fetal position against the wall. And her just kicking me and screaming, you don't tell anybody what goes on in this family. To the point I had to wear long sleeve shirts to school for 2 or 3 weeks for the bruises because Mom didn't want anybody to see the bruises.
From his landmark days with the Imperials, throughout his solo career, and the seasons with the Gaither Vocal Band, Russ has always delivered an unmistakable passion for singing about God's love.
About 3 years ago, the GMA Dove Awards gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award, and then last year they put me in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. I bowed my head and I began to weep. And Tori asked me on the way home, she said, why were you crying? It was such a night of celebration. And I said, Tori,
If it hadn't been for Jesus, I wouldn't be standing up there. I'd probably be dead the way I was going. And I said, Tori, if anybody should get that award, it should be you and Jesus, because I know me. And the greatest thing I've learned is how much he loves me. Be kind to one another, love one another, care for one another. I'm so proud to be a gospel singer and to sing about the one who makes all things new.
I was in New York with Tori. It was July when we were there, and it was so hot. But there was a Heineken in the fridge, and so I just popped it, and Tori and I were talking, and I was drinking this like a Coke. And all of a sudden, I started feeling something. And so I had another one, and I drank all three of them, and all the pain went away. All the voices went away. And for the first time ever in my life, my brain was quiet. And I really thought, this is a miracle. I can live this way because I don't hear the voices anymore. I wasn't a partier. I never drank around anybody, but I liked the way it made me feel. It numbed me, and I didn't feel the pain anymore. And I remember thanking Jesus for this. I was sucked in so fast, but it's so funny from the get-go, I started hiding it. And after a short amount of time, it turned on me. It began to increase the pain because there's so much guilt. That was the start, hiding, lying, covering it up, but needing a drink every day. You start drinking earlier because of the hangovers and you're sick. But I had disliked me, but now I began to hate me. I hated what I became. I hated that I couldn't quit. And I would try, I would go maybe 2 weeks, but the draw was too great.
I will say, as soon as he started drinking alcoholically, in the sense that it never was about the taste, it never was about sipping a glass of wine, it was about getting numb as quickly as possible. By the time it really was out of control, I read all the symptoms as our life was blowing up, our marriage was blowing up. I couldn't see that it was alcohol because I wasn't seeing him drunk. He was moody, he was angry, completely turned inward.
We did a tour together in the 80s. He was actually struggling with alcohol on the tour that we were on together, but I didn't know that. There are a lot of reasons to not show light on sort of the festering wound. Because it'll rock the boat. And especially if their talent is generating income for other people, you just want to kind of keep that, just whatever it takes, keep it going, keep it going.
I would ask him, are you happy? You said something to the effect of, sometimes I feel so angry, or sometimes that I'll take a drink of something. And I was, what? Never saw any evidence of this, never smelled anything on him. And I said, what are you talking about? And I said, drink what? And you said, vodka. I said, where? And you said, in the car. Sometimes I keep it in the car. And I, of course, marched him out. It was like, show me. We marched out the car, and he opened the trunk, and he dug around in there, and there's this bottle. And when I was standing there, you said, what? And I said, I want to hit you right now. I want to hit you. And I'm very passive. I don't throw dishes. I physically wanted to belt him. And what I said is, you're going to ruin this. You're going to ruin this. So I thought the message I'm sending is, this is how serious I'm taking this, and this is how important this is to me. And I want you to know I won't live like your family lived, and you can't do this. Later when we talked, Russ said the message I got was, you better hide this better.
Wow, Maddie Rose, that's a good ride.
It's strange when you're a child and you see, you've got your father at home that'll, play with you and that, is just a goofball, to be up on stage with this crazy loud voice singing to X amount of people. It's overwhelming. He's your daddy, and you love him, but then you see, oh my gosh, all these other people love him too. You feel like you're sharing him. And yeah, I remember even as a child being so proud. He was gone a whole lot, especially when I was really little.
Growing up with him, there was some disconnect because Dad didn't know what he was doing with his life about this depression, this family sickness. So there are parts of him that I didn't know as a kid. It's sad to say, but there's parts of him of happiness that I didn't know he had.
I told lies to cover up my drinking. I would come in early on and I'd be smelling like beer or something. And she'd, how many you had? And, oh, I had a couple. When the thing is, I drank 8. I never drank at all when she was with me.
So the hiding and the drinking were simultaneous. As soon as alcohol, you introduced alcohol into your life, it came with hiding.
But I knew right from the get-go I was lying, and it bothered me. It bothered me.
Russ lying to me again and again and again makes me feel crazy because my gut's telling me one thing, and this person that I love and that I trust and that I am in this relationship with is looking me in the face and telling me that what my gut is feeling is not the truth.
You know, you watch somebody that you love hurting and you can't do anything about it except just love them and be there and assure them that you're not going anywhere. That's probably the hardest part.
He would pick a fight. He would push me into being discombobulated, and then I didn't want to go out with him. I didn't want to be on a bus with him. He had just been such a jerk for the last week. But then he could go out by himself on the road and drink secretly. And any good alcoholic worth their salt knows how to knock you emotionally off balance, because that's what addiction has to do to survive. Because when he was nice, the sunshine came out. And then when he withdrew that love, which is what it felt like, and which what
I was taught.
Is what he knew, then it would be, where'd he go? So there was just something on my gut level is wrong, and he's going away and I can't reach him. This was biggest career records and albums and everything he did. He was at the top of his game. Biggest crowds, biggest everything. Which at the time intensifies the insanity of it.
You guys, he's awesome. Love you.
The evening of the Timeless concert, I was producing the show.
That's Dan Postema, famous A&R producer.
The man who made us all what we are today.
The climax of the show was a moment where we were going to have Russ sing with his old group, the Imperials. They hadn't sung together for many, many years. An hour before the show, no Russ. About 5 minutes before we took the stage, he came running in.
You're my brother, you're my sister, so take me by the hand. Together we will work until he comes.
The thing about Russ is he has this kind of rock and roll swagger and stance. So he was up there and I think everything is okay. And yet I wasn't totally sure because he was moving around a little bit too much.
To the Lord, come on everybody, stand up and sing one more. Hallelujah, give the praise to the Lord.
I started to wonder if he was feeling all right. I thought maybe he was sick. My son, who was up in the balcony, texted me and said, I think Russ is drunk. And I dismissed that immediately. But the more I watched him, I thought, whatever's happening, I need to get this guy off stage as quickly as possible for his own good. While somebody else is singing, I just walked on stage and tapped him on the shoulder and said, Russ, follow me. He walked back to the library and I said a couple words to him and then I knew immediately what the problem was. He was quite intoxicated. I said, Russ, I think you just need to sit here and rest and we need to find a way to get you home.
I didn't know what it was. I just knew that Dad was doing a show and it was going to be fun. And I always would, go with him when it was local because, that's just what you do. And I had a friend with me. I just remember people that I didn't know came to come get us. And they were like, hey, we have to drive you home. We're confused, but we went. I had no idea what was going on. Him, relapsing didn't even cross my mind.
I saw a man who was in great pain. And that pain got the best of him that day, and he had to go medicated.
They took me off the stage at halftime, and Dan just hugged me, and I started crying. Sarah, his wife, just held me while I cried. And they could have hammered me, they could have scolded, and I would have taken anything, but they chose to love me. And Sarah brought me home, and Tori was horrified, just horrified.
When I realized that he was absolutely drunk and he pretty much climbed in the bed and passed out, I remember trying to find out from him what happened. Did you go on stage like this? And he was kind of saying he didn't want to talk, he was mad, and then I'd have to walk out and to the girls and go, want brownies? So I'd be in the kitchen making brownies, and then I'd come back in to my drunk husband. But this was the line that had not been crossed. He had never walked out on stage so impaired that it was obvious to everyone there. It struck such fear in my heart because it was like that was the last boundary. He was in free fall. If this happened, then I think we lost him. I think we lost him.
I remember them walking me to the front door, and I went going inside and went right to the bed and passed out. And I wanted to just run, just go somewhere and nobody know where I am, and just start a new life.
He started heading out of the bedroom in towards the kitchen. I was like, oh no. And I pushed him back in, physically pushed him back in. He was gonna get in the car and go. He was just gonna get, and I was like, no, you're not. And I said, where are your keys? And I grabbed the keys and I pulled them and I raked them across his forehead, and a line of blood showed up. And I won't repeat what I said, but it was along the lines of, if you walk out in front of my child, I will end you. And I meant it. Mm-hmm. And he this was new territory for Russ as well. So he got back in bed and I went out to serve the brownies. This is the insanity of addiction. And he left. He had another set of keys and he left.
I climbed out the bedroom window.
I remember, I don't know how much later, because this is when my memory starts to get foggy. I didn't know what to do, and so I just started walking, and then I remember I was on the road, and I looked up, and he was still kind of, out of it. He was driving, and he looked at me, but it was like he just looked right through me, and then he just kept driving, and then he was gone.
She looked up, and their eyes met, and she said there wasn't anybody there. And she came in the house and said, what's wrong with Dad and where did he go?
I just wanted to get away and drink till I passed out and drink till I passed out and drink till I passed out. And that's the way my dad used to do.
And he wasn't answering his phone. And I thought he's gonna hurt himself.
I shouldn't have been driving. No way.
No.
And I went through sometimes I just let go of the steering wheel when I was driving and just see how long it would take me to veer off. I wouldn't kill myself, but I thought about it some because I hated me and I was dangerous.
It was the worst night of my life. He disappeared. I didn't know where he was. I was up all night. He ended up in a hotel, in a Holiday Inn Express, and I called Becca Stevens, and she and another close friend got in the car together and drove out and got him and brought him home.
When he was on the curbside, just sitting by his car, he couldn't even get in, and he was drunk. And I was like, Russ, you gotta come with me. We gotta get some help.
I cried all the way home because I was starting to sober up, and if I'm going home, I can't drink anymore. To let me sober up, to face head on what I had just done.
We all just kind of isolated. Yeah, nobody really knew what to do.
I didn't really remember hardly anything of the concert. I had no memory of it. I just remember feeling like I've destroyed me. I've destroyed her. I'm destroying my kids.
And you just destroyed your career.
And I just destroyed my career.
For too many years, we've been holding on to each other. And Satan come and trip somebody up, and they'll mess up, and they'll go, how dare you do that? You call yourself a Christian. Instead of considering that could happen to us and saying, brother, I love you. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm not going to gossip. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to intercede for you and lift you back up, and I'll hold on to you, and I'm not going to let the devil drag you out of the kingdom.
I wonder if Russ would have been surprised to have heard the conversation afterwards. It wasn't, well, he sure messed this up. Well, we've got to do this whole taping over again. It was this somber, man, that guy's hurting. There was such concern, and such worry.
All the artists agreed the best way to help him is to pray for him and keep quiet. Let this be a family matter. Don't let this hit the rumor mill. Let's protect him. Let's love him. Let's pray for him.
I never saw a body protect another human being like they did him. Nobody's trying to cover up anything. They just simply said, this guy's hurt. We need to protect him until he gets well. Is that beautiful?
But I saw the body of Christ show its power and its strength.
And to this day, that stands in my entire life as one of the most loving, merciful things I have ever been a part of, I've ever witnessed.
I dealt with it in, kind of seclusion, kind of just don't want to deal with all this family drama. And in a ways that had stunted me for a while with how to deal with certain situations.
I had a way to climb up on top of our roof at the house, and I would go out at night when my parents were asleep, and I would look up at the stars and the sky and the moon. And that was the times that I knew that I was looking up and somebody was looking back, and that somehow, some way, things were going to be okay, and I was going to understand normal again. I was going to understand life again.
What I was angriest at with him was that I knew my daughters now had been affected. We didn't lie to them, we didn't pretend, but he had never been drunk in front of them. No. Russ sat down with the girls. He said, you know that Daddy Joe had a disease of alcoholism. He drove everybody away from him, and he died alone in the hospital room, mad at everybody. And I have that same disease, and I don't want to do that. So I'm gonna go to a place where they're gonna work with me and teach me how to figure out what's going on and why I can't get well. But I need to do this because you deserve it.
It's in Santa Fe, New Mexico, up in the mountains, and they have maybe 20 patients at a time, so there's a lot of intense therapy. They began to lead me down to my first memories, but I went all the way back to the beginning, and I could see myself as a toddler and what happened. That when I was 4 and 6, and we would stay on that just for a little while, then they'd lead me to the next one.
My attitude was good, another treatment center, yippee. Let's drain our retirement savings, which we did, and let's pay for Russ to go talk about himself again for 30 days. And I knew that the marriage was over, and I knew that I would be leaving. So while he was at yet another treatment center, I was gonna be home making plans. In my mind, I had moved on. I hadn't forsaken him, I loved him, but I was done. Russ's trauma was his childhood. My trauma was Russ's addiction.
After 3 weeks of this and crying every day, it begins to come to the surface. the Holy Spirit would just polish it a little bit, you know, and make it where it was okay. It didn't hurt anymore. And this one, okay. And after 3 weeks, I could think about my folks and not hurt anymore. But I was shocked because a miracle had happened, and I didn't know how. But it happened.
What happened in Santa Fe, what came out was how bad it was. And that's the truth he had been shoving down and protecting his parents from and protecting himself from. It was so much worse. I didn't know there was almost daily violence in that home from both parents. And when he got to Santa Fe, they made him stay down there, and the rest of the story would come out. And it would end with Russ in the fetal position on the floor and somebody kicking him.
I had gotten out of the trauma center, and I went to Mark Lowry's. 4 months later, we were hanging out and visiting with Mark. Mark's pastor called and asked if I would come, and his father was dying of cancer, and he loved the DVD that Gaither did on me, and he would watch it in the hospital room, and they asked me to come. And I took my acoustic guitar and I went. But when I walked in that door, I stopped dead in my tracks. I mean, I just froze because he looked so much like my dad. It was just freakish how much he looked like my daddy. And he had white hair like my dad. He had big hands like my dad, blue eyes like my dad, and I was shocked. I mean, my own dad so much, really do, really do. I didn't know whether to turn and run. I didn't know what to do, but I walked in there, and when he saw me, he threw his hands like, "Oh, Russ," and tears starts rolling down his face. The first thing he said to me when I walked in was, he said, "I taught my boys how to live, and if God doesn't heal me, I'm going to teach my boys how to die." That's the heart of a father. That's Dad. And so I started singing, and I would say, "What do you want to hear now?" And he'd go, "Heartbreak Ridge and New Hope Road," and I would sing. And he started getting kind of tired, and I was getting ready to leave, and he said, "Russ, would you pray for me?" And I mumbled something, you know, I felt so intimidated.
Love you. Wow.
And when I finished, I looked at him and I said, "Pastor John, would you pray for me?" And I wanted to reach out and grab those words and pull it back because, you know, he was tired and I was ready to leave. But he said, "Oh, Russ, I'd love to." And he stands up and he puts his big hands on my shoulders, and I'm looking up just like I would Dad when I was a kid, you know? And he starts praying, and I begin to cry, and I begin to cry deeper and deeper.
But you have set aside, Russ, for special anointing. You set aside, Russ, for special people and places.
I went down to my knees. I couldn't stand anymore.
There's no accident, God, that you walk into this hospital. No, Lord.
And he began to tell me how proud he was that I'd given my talent to Jesus and I'd been serving Jesus and how God loved me.
Let him feel and know that he is needed, wanted in the body of Christ.
And he took my head, pulled it to his chest, his belly, and began to stroke my hair. And every time an affirmation would come, I would cry deeper and deeper, and it was like 50 years of this just started coming out. I realized once I started crying so deep, he's healing me. There's still that need to be affirmed by somebody that says, "You're doing good, you know, you're doing great, and I'm so proud of you." That day, everything changed, and it's like everything fell in order then. My mind, my body, and my spirit all just connected. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. Father God, Father Daddy, has wrapped his arms around me, and he said, "This moment, you're free." Since that day, the urge to drink is gone. I mean, it was a miracle, absolute miracle. And when I feel pain today, I don't run to a bottle, but I run to Daddy. And he keeps me sober. But as I left that hospital room and I went back and I walked to the door, Tori 30 feet away, she looked at me and she said, "What happened to you?" It was that evident in her mind.
When Russ went away and when he came back, and he was different. And I knew that I made a decision to go ahead and stay for now. And my one day at a time was waking up in the morning and saying, can I be married to Russ and not be sick? And I meant sick in the sense of codependent and making bad decisions of being there for a reason, like I'm gonna save him. But when he came home and he was different, and I decided I'll stay today.
The long haul, the hard work was gonna be her. And I had to commit to it. Jesus, I'm committing to this path. Now would you help me? I was nervous coming home because I'd been away from her for 65 days. And I didn't know what path she had chosen. But when I got home and I saw that she was willing to stay and fight, I realized there's a chance. There's a chance. But we started having dates again. We would go to dinner and focus on each other. My relationship with her had just really suffered. And so we began to pursue getting acquainted again. And it was baby steps.
So after a while, I quit having to ask myself, can I be married to him today and not be sick? I don't know when that stopped, but there was a point in which it was a moot point. I was in it. I told God, I don't feel forgiveness, I feel wariness.
When I came back, what I wanted to see with her was her to be happy again. I wanted her to enjoy life like she used to.
When we're back into the day-to-day of life and we're picking kids up and we're getting groceries, I started feeling like I had a friend. We weren't partners yet again. I didn't keep him too close, but I enjoyed being with him. And at some point after that, and I remember talking to him about this and Russ leaning in, physically leaning in, and he was engaged and listening, and I started feeling affectionate, and gradually and in increments, I started enjoying him. Then I knew God had worked the forgiveness and that trust was returning. We hadn't had fun together in a long time at that point. It was work and fear. Enjoying was a big deal.
I'm in the autumn years of my career. How can people see what God has done to where He is glorified unless they know the story? But I'm at a point of confidence now. The odds are really good that I'm not going to fall back into old behavior.
He's not on probation. I don't feel blame. I just feel grateful.
I have a dad now that I never would have had otherwise. If this is what it took to get him to where he's at now, I'm grateful. He's present, he's loving, he's engaged. Yeah, I'm grateful for that place.
What held us so much is both of us, our faith in Jesus and trying to follow His voice and His direction and not listening to outside voices that would encourage us to run away from each other.
And trust didn't look like hearts and flowers. And recovery between us didn't look like presents and poems and Hallmark cards. I was watching him do what it takes, and that's really the most romantic part to me.
You receive Jesus as your Savior. That's the easy part. Then He starts trying to change your character. He starts trying to make you honest, and it's work. You got His nature and your nature butting heads, and then after a while you begin to trust Him. There is a place that you grow up in Jesus, and you don't do the right things because you fear Him. You do the right things because you love Him so much.
He still goes once a month to the AA and is honest enough to admit that I am a recovering alcoholic, to go to the meeting every month and simply say, this is who I am. I take total ownership of it.
When you have nothing left and the snot cry has come and gone and come and gone, and it's only devastation and there is no good, There's no good staying, there's no good leaving. It's awful, awful. Dying sounds even better than living. God comes into that stillness. It's a big dose of mercy.
He was just so sure that God was disappointed in him and that God maybe didn't love him anymore. Gradually, he just began to understand he's loved me all this time. He never did stop loving me. And I think the realization of that has just been like a whole new transition of salvation again.
I'm a living testimony of what the power of Christ can do in a person's life. You got to be laser focused on the prize. And the prize is I get my life back. The prize is I get my family back.
He owned it. The only reason we're still married is because there was never once in the decades of our marriage that he said, well, if you had just this, maybe I wouldn't drink. He would look at me when I'm screaming my accusations at him. In a therapist's office, he'd look me right in the eye and say, I did it, and I'm sorry. It didn't make me feel better, but it gave us something to build on.
It took me coming to the end of Christianity as I knew it, the whole time trying to follow this God that did not like me, and the God of my father that was cruel and hard. But it took me just crashing before I would let go of that and start looking at who is Jesus.
He came home with something healed that brought peace, and that was the reason I could stay, because I wasn't fighting for him all by myself.
I learned how to be an adult and not just this wounded kid that's, you know, everybody look at my pain, look at my pain, look at my pain, but I changed into an adult.
We were going to Gaither Family Fest, and Dad had gotten a new medication for his depression, and he was just so elated and happy and just motivated to do anything and everything. And I turned to Mom and I was just like, I've never seen Dad like this before. And she said, this is what he was like before everything, honestly, that had affected him so much.
It had a scarring effect for sure. I was lost for quite a few years. And then it takes a while to get trust back. But if it's anything that I can say about my dad, it's that he's a fighter. And he got that trust back.